The broken transmission. The cold darkness of space stretched forever, filled with broken ships and burning worlds. Captain Elias Ward sat inside his small human scout ship, staring at the empty stars. The war between humanity and the Galactic Council had lasted too long, and too many soldiers had already died. He was supposed to return to the main fleet after a failed rescue mission, but something in his mind refused to stop searching. He kept scanning the communication frequencies again and again, hoping for one last signal, one last sign of life. Then through the static, a faint voice whispered, "Please, someone help me. This is Princess Lyra of the Altherian Empire. My world is gone." Elias froze, his heart pounding. He knew the name, everyone did. The Altherian princess was said to be dead. Her world destroyed months ago. The Altherians had once been allies of humanity, before the Council forced them into surrender. Now her desperate voice came through broken signals. Filled with fear and pain, he replayed the message, adjusting the frequency until he caught the coordinates. They pointed to a dead system far beyond the safe border. A place where no human ship returned. Command would never approve a rescue there. He opened a channel and reported the signal. But the answer came quickly. "Captain Ward, disregard that transmission. It's a trap. Return to base immediately." Elias sat in silence for a moment, the sound of static filling the cockpit. Then he slowly turned off the communication link. He whispered to himself, "If it's a trap, I'll deal with it, but if it's real, she's out there alone." He powered up his ship's engines, the thrusters glowing bright against the void. The autopilot plotted the route through broken sectors filled with drifting debris. He checked his weapons, his armor, and his last energy reserves. He knew it might be a one-way trip. But he had made his decision. As the ship jumped into hyperspace, he stared at the stars turning into long streaks of light. He thought about the message again, the fear in her voice, the way she said the word Mom. Something inside him couldn't ignore it. Not after all the death he had seen. Hours later, the ship dropped out of hyperspace into a system filled with silence. A red sun burned weakly over a dead world, its surface cracked and blackened from bombardment. Elias ran a scan. No human signals, no friendly ships, only faint energy signatures deep in the planet's southern hemisphere. He activated his landing thrusters and guided the ship through heavy dust storms. Pieces of destroyed cities floated in the air like ghosts. The ground was littered with the bones of machines and soldiers from both sides. When he landed, the silence was almost painful. He stepped out in full combat armor, holding a plasma rifle, his boots sinking into gray dust. Every movement made a soft echo across the ruins. He activated his helmet scanner, searching for life signs. After several minutes, he caught something faint, a small heat signature under the remains of a crashed shuttle. He moved carefully, climbing over metal wreckage until he reached a half-buried hatch. He knocked twice and said softly, "It's okay, I'm human. I'm here to help," a weak voice answered, trembling. "Don't hurt me." He knelt down and said, "I won't, I promise." When the hatch opened, a young alien girl looked up at him, her silver eyes filled with tears. Her clothes were torn, her hands shaking, but she still carried the royal emblem on her wrist. She was the princess, just as the message said. For a moment, Elias couldn't speak. He had expected a soldier or an ambush, not a child trying to survive. He extended his hand. "I'm Captain Elias Ward of the human fleet. I came because of your call." She stared at him with fear, then slowly took his hand. Her skin was cold, and her voice cracked as she whispered, "You shouldn't have come. They're hunting me." Elias looked around the ruins, the wind carrying the faint sound of distant engines. He knew she was right. The enemy would not leave a survivor like her alive. He lifted her onto his shoulder gently and said, "Then we better move before they find us." They started walking through the burned streets, the sky glowing with red lightning. The ground trembled every few minutes. As if something large was moving beneath the surface, Elias kept checking his radar. But the interference made it useless still. He could feel it. Someone or something was tracking them. After an hour of walking, they reached an old underground tunnel system once used by Altherian transports. He found a small maintenance room still powered by emergency generators. He set the princess down, gave her a ration pack, and said gently, "You're safe here for now." She looked up at him and asked, "Why would a human save me?" Elias smiled faintly behind his cracked visor. "Because someone has to." Her eyes softened. But before she could speak, the tunnel shook violently. A deep rumble echoed through the ground, dust falling from the ceiling. Elias raised his weapon and looked toward the entrance. Outside, something massive was moving, a metal giant rising from the ashes. Its sensors locking onto them, he whispered. "Stay behind me." As the ancient war machine turned its glowing eyes toward the tunnel, Elias gripped his rifle tighter. In that moment, he realized his mission had only just begun. The ruins of the fallen world, the tunnel shuddered again. Sending waves of dust through the air, Elias pressed his back against the wall and listened. The heavy metallic footsteps above them echoed like thunder. The old Altherian war machine was awake, its sensors scanning for movement, its weapons humming with deadly power. Princess Lyra clutched the side of her helmet, her small voice trembling. "It's one of the Guardians. They were built to protect my people." Her words faded as another tremor shook the ground. "Now they serve the invaders," Elias said quietly, his grip tightening on his rifle. He peeked through a crack in the ceiling. The sight above made his stomach twist. The war machine stood taller than a building, covered in black armor scorched by battle. Its face glowed with red light, and each step crushed what remained of the ancient city. Elias could see the alien patrols following behind it, searching the ruins with scanners and drones. He turned back to the princess. "We move now. Stay close and stay quiet." She nodded silently, clutching the small pendant around her neck, the symbol of her royal bloodline. Elias led her through the tunnels, passing old murals of the Altherian people, bright colors now faded by time and fire. Each painting told stories of peace, music, and light, a world that no longer existed. They climbed through a service shaft and emerged into the lower streets. The air outside was hot and filled with the smell of burned metal and ash. Buildings lay in twisted shapes melted by orbital fire. The princess covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes as she looked at what used to be her home. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "Keep moving. Don't look back." They crossed a broken bridge over a river of glowing liquid metal, the remains of a collapsed reactor. In the distance, strange flying drones hovered, their red eyes scanning the area. Elias crouched low, pulling the princess behind a wall. "Those drones," she whispered. "They were our own scouts." Elias frowned. "The enemy reprogrammed them. They'll report anything they see." He pulled out a small device from his belt, a pulse jammer. He pressed a button and a wave of blue light spread across the ruins. The drones flickered and crashed to the ground like dying birds. The princess gasped softly, amazed. "You humans are clever." Elias smiled faintly. "Sometimes we have to be." They moved through the empty streets until they reached a wide square covered in rubble. In the center stood a broken statue, the Queen of Altheria herself, carved from crystal and stone. Now split in half, Lyra stared at it, her voice shaking. "That was my mother's gift to the city." Elias watched her silently, then said, "She would want you to survive." Before she could reply, a sharp whine filled the air. A scanner beam swept across the square, bright red light cutting through the smoke. Elias pushed the princess down. Hiding behind a fallen column moments later, a group of armored soldiers appeared, their armor shining under the stormlight. They spoke in a harsh alien tongue, weapons raised, scanning the area. Elias took a deep breath, checking his ammo count. "Only 2 energy cells left," he whispered. "Stay here, no matter what happens." Then he crawled to the side of the rubble and aimed his rifle. He fired once, the first soldier fell, his body bursting in a flash of blue. The others shouted, firing back, bolts of plasma tearing through the walls. Elias rolled to cover and threw a small grenade. The explosion shook the ground. He charged out, his armor scorched, moving faster than they expected. He fired shot after shot until the last one fell, smoke rising around them. When the sound finally faded, the princess slowly stood up, her face pale. She had never seen such violence before. Elias reloaded his weapon, breathing heavily. His visor cracked even more. He turned to her and said softly, "We can't stay here. The machine will hear the fight," Lyra nodded, wiping her tears. "Where will we go?" Elias pointed toward the horizon where a line of dark mountains stood under the red sky. "Old refugee tunnels lead there if we reach them. We can find shelter." They started walking again, moving through narrow streets where shadows danced on burned walls. The princess walked quietly beside him, her small steps echoing softly. As they crossed into the outskirts of the ruined city, A strange blue glow appeared in the clouds. Elias looked up and frowned. That's no lightning. A beam of light fell from the sky and hit the ground miles away. The explosion that followed sent a wave of energy racing toward them. He grabbed the princess and pulled her behind a stone wall just as the blast swept past. The ground shook violently, fires rising all around them. The sky turned red, and for a moment it looked like the planet itself was crying. When the shockwave faded, Elias stood up slowly, helping the princess to her feet. Her voice broke as she whispered, "They won't stop until everything is gone." Elias looked at her, his tone steady. "Then we'll make them stop." He checked his scanner again. New energy readings were appearing all around the city. Not just soldiers, but heavy walkers, drones, and gunships moving in from orbit. It was a full search operation. They were hunting for her. Elias realized the only chance left was to reach the old mountains before nightfall. He turned to the princess, his voice calm but firm. "From now on, you stay right behind me." She nodded silently, clutching her pendant again as they walked deeper into the ruins. The sound of engines grew louder. Above them, the war machine moved slowly through the fog, its red sensors sweeping the streets. Elias and the princess hid under the shadow of a fallen bridge. Hearts pounding in unison, the soldier knew the odds were against them. But his mission was clear. Keep her alive no matter what it cost. He whispered under his breath, "We'll make it, kid." And somewhere far above the clouds, unseen by either of them, a human satellite locked onto their signal again. The message it sent back to the fleet was simple. Elias Ward is still alive. The march through enemy lines. The cold red sky began to fade into a darker shade as evening came over the ruins. Elias Ward and Princess Lyra moved carefully through the broken streets, their shadows stretching long across the cracked ground. The air was filled with the low hum of enemy drones sweeping the area. Scanning for any sign of life, every sound echoed. The crunch of rubble under boots, the hiss of wind against metal, even the princess's slow breathing. Elias raised a hand, signaling her to stop. His visor picked up heat signatures ahead. 3 soldiers patrolling the remains of an old bridge, he whispered. "We go around. Keep low," and guided her through the wreckage of a destroyed hovercraft. Lyra followed closely, her small hands gripping the side of his armor. She was exhausted, but she refused to slow down. Her eyes showed fear, but also determination. Elias admired that silent strength. She wasn't just a frightened child anymore. She was learning what survival meant. They reached a narrow alley filled with twisted metal pipes and shattered glass. Elias scanned the horizon. The mountains were still far away, maybe 20 kilometers. But between them and safety lay open ground controlled by the Council's armies. He knew if they were spotted, there would be no way to fight through. They found shelter inside the remains of an old warehouse. The roof half collapsed and the floor covered in dust. Elias set his rifle down and activated a small portable shield to hide their energy signatures. He opened his ration pack and handed it to Lyra. "Eat slowly. It's all we've got for now." She nodded and took a bite, her face pale from hunger. After a while, she looked at him and said quietly, "You could have left me. You could have gone back." Elias leaned against the wall, his armor clicking softly as the servos cooled. "Maybe I could have, but that's not who we are." She tilted her head. "Humans." He nodded. "Humans." Lyra's eyes softened. "My mother told me once that humans were dangerous, that you only fought for power." Elias smiled faintly. "Sometimes she's right, but sometimes we fight for something better, for someone who needs help." The words lingered in the air like a quiet promise. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, lightning cutting across the sky. Elias checked his wrist console. Storm approaching. High radiation in the atmosphere. They couldn't stay long. The storm would interfere with his systems and expose them to scanners. He stood up, adjusting his weapon strap. "We move again." Lyra followed without question, and together they slipped back into the ruins. They walked through burned plazas and silent streets filled with statues of fallen heroes. Sometimes they heard voices, soldiers shouting orders in alien language, but they stayed hidden, moving from shadow to shadow as the night deepened. They reached the edge of the city. Beyond it stretched a wide plain lit by distant fires, where the remains of crashed ships glowed like broken stars. The plains were known as the glass fields, once a beautiful region of forests now turned into black, mirror-like ground by orbital bombardment. Elias crouched behind a broken pillar and zoomed in with his visor. There were hundreds of enemy troops stationed near the plane, tents glowing with blue lights, hover tanks parked in lines, patrol drones circling above. The human soldier took a slow breath. There's no way through unless we distract them. Lyra frowned. How? Elias smiled, pulling a small black sphere from his belt. With a little human creativity, he rolled the sphere across the ground and tapped a code on his wrist pad. Seconds later, a bright flash lit the distance. The sphere exploded into hundreds of decoy signals. Mimicking multiple life forms, the enemy camp came alive instantly. Alarms blaring, troops running in every direction. Elias grabbed Lyra's hand. Now, he whispered, and they ran across the open plain. Their feet moved silently over the glass-like ground, reflections of fire dancing around them. Every few seconds, searchlights swept across the area. Narrowly missing them each time, Lyra stumbled once, and Elias caught her before she fell, pulling her behind a piece of wreckage. Almost there, he said, his voice calm but firm. They reached a hill of burned metal, and from the top, they could finally see the dark outline of the mountains for the first time in days. Hope filled the air, but just as Elias smiled, his visor flashed red, motion detected behind them. 3 drones had broken from the camp and were flying directly toward their position. Elias cursed under his breath and lifted his rifle. The first shot hit the lead drone, sending it spinning into the dirt. The other 2 fired back, plasma bolts tearing through the night, explosions lighting the horizon. He pushed Lyra behind a fallen ship wing and kept firing, his armor taking several hits. When the smoke cleared, the drones were gone, but so was his rifle's power cell. Lyra crawled beside him, her eyes wide. You're hurt. Elias looked down at his shoulder. The armor plate was cracked, a thin line of blood seeping through. He shook his head. Just a scratch, though the pain was sharp and deep. He wrapped a piece of cloth around the wound. Ignoring the shaking in his hands, they continued forward, slower now. Guided by the faint glow of the mountains as they reached the edge of the plain, they came across a ruined transport half buried in the sand. Elias climbed inside, searching the control panels. To his surprise, he found something, an old Altherian map projector still working. When he activated it, a holographic map filled the air, showing a hidden path through the mountain base that led directly to the royal citadel. Lyra's eyes widened. That's where my mother might be. Elias nodded. Then that's where we go. But before he could shut it down, the console emitted a small tone. A beacon signal had been triggered. He froze, realizing what it meant. Someone else now knew their location. Lyra looked at him fearfully. They're coming, aren't they? He took a deep breath and said softly, yes, and this time, they won't stop. The wind howled through the ruins as distant engines roared in the sky. Elias looked toward the mountains and whispered, we'll make it. I promise. Then he turned his eyes to the stars. As if daring the galaxy to stop him, the princess followed his gaze, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and trust. Together, they disappeared into the shadows of the glass fields, the war behind them and destiny waiting ahead far above, unseen by both. The Galactic Council's fleet adjusted course. The hunt for the human and the lost princess had officially begun. The night was silent. Too silent. Captain Elias Ward could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down as he and Princess Lyra reached the base of the Black Mountains. Each ridge rose like the teeth of a sleeping giant, jagged and covered with ash from ancient bombardments. The only light came from the faint blue shimmer of the storm above and the glowing cracks in the distant plains. Every few seconds the ground rumbled. The enemy fleet was deploying more ships, more soldiers, and they were closing in fast. Elias scanned the valley below, his visor marking dozens of incoming heat signatures. He sighed, knowing they would not have time to reach the tunnels before being surrounded. The princess looked up at him, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dark. What are we going to do? Elias checked his remaining ammo, 2 grenades, 1 half-charged rifle, and a few rounds left in his sidearm. He smiled softly. We're going to make them think they've already lost. He found an old comms tower half buried in the rocks, its circuit still humming with dormant power. Using the last of his tools, he rewired the signal core, connecting it to his armor link. Lyra watched him work, fascinated and worried. What are you doing? Elias didn't look up, his hands steady even as dust fell from nearby tremors. Setting up a trap, an old human trick. When she tilted her head in confusion, he added with a faint grin, "We call it misdirection." He rigged the tower to broadcast a false distress call, a digital ghost that would lure enemy scouts into the wrong valley. At the same time, he placed small proximity mines around their current position. Creating a deadly ring of defense, Lyra followed quietly, carrying the light pack he gave her every few minutes. The faint echo of engines filled the air, reminding them how little time they had left by the time he was done. The first rays of dawn were creeping over the mountains. Elias looked at the rising light, whispering to himself, "Another sunrise. Another chance to fight." The princess sat nearby, her hands wrapped around her pendant, her face streaked with dust. "When this is over, will you go home?" Elias paused, the question hitting harder than a bullet. "If I still have one," he said quietly. He turned away before she could see the sorrow in his eyes. The first drone appeared not long after, cutting through the air like a metallic hawk. Elias aimed carefully and fired, the shot slicing through its core, sending it crashing into the rocks. The explosion was small but loud enough to alert the others. Within minutes, more machines descended from the clouds, followed by alien soldiers in shining armor. They moved in formation, their weapons glowing. Lyra stepped back in fear, but Elias raised his hand calmly. "Stay behind me. No matter what happens." Then the battle began. Elias fired his rifle in short bursts, each shot finding its target, his years of combat experience guiding every move. He ducked behind a rock, threw a grenade, and watched it explode among the soldiers, scattering them like leaves. The mines he planted earlier began to detonate, bright flashes lighting the mountain pass. The sound echoed for miles, the roar of one human standing against an army. Lyra could only watch in awe as he moved like a ghost through the smoke, each action precise and fearless. A plasma bolt struck his shoulder, spinning him around, but he caught himself on one knee and kept firing. Pain seared through his body, but his will was stronger. The alien commander shouted something in their harsh language. Sending more troops forward, Elias switched to his sidearm, emptying every round into the advancing line. When his gun clicked empty, he drew his combat knife and charged. He moved with brutal efficiency, silent and relentless. Each strike was a promise that humanity would never bow. Lyra screamed his name as another explosion threw dust into the air. For a moment she thought he was gone. But then through the smoke she saw him rise again, one arm bleeding, his visor cracked, but his stance unbroken. He staggered toward her, breathing heavily. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why do you keep doing this? You can't win against all of them." He smiled, tired but steady. "Winning isn't the point," he said. "Protecting you is." More enemy dropships appeared overhead, their engines roaring like thunder. Elias knew this would be their final stand. He looked at the princess. "Listen carefully. You're going to run to the caves when I say go. There's a path that leads to the royal citadel." Lyra's eyes widened. "I won't leave you." He crouched down to her level, his voice softer now. "You have to, because your mother is still out there, and she needs to know what humanity did for you." He pressed a small data chip into her hand. "Give this to her. Proof that the council betrayed us all." Before she could answer, another explosion ripped through the ground and the mountains shook violently. Elias turned and unleashed everything he had left. Grenades, rifle bursts, and a roar that echoed through the valley. The alien soldiers fell back, their formations breaking. Lyra hesitated for one last second, then turned and ran toward the caves, her heart breaking with each step. Behind her, the human soldier stood tall, surrounded by smoke and fire, still fighting, still defying. When she reached the tunnel entrance, she looked back one final time. Through the haze, she saw him standing on a ridge, the rising sun glowing behind him. Even the enemy seemed to pause, their weapons lowering as the human raised his rifle one last time. Then the mountain ridge exploded in light as the mines detonated all at once. Collapsing the pass, the blast threw dust and fire high into the air, sealing the tunnels behind her. Lyra fell to her knees, sobbing, "Elias!" Deep inside the mountain, the echoes of the explosion faded into silence. For a long time, there was only darkness and the sound of her own heartbeat. She touched her pendant and whispered, "I'll make sure your story is never forgotten." Above the mountains, smoke curled into the morning sky, forming the faint outline of wings, the shape of the fallen soldier's courage, and somewhere far away across the stars, a human fleet received a final coded message from Captain Elias Ward's armor beacon. 3 simple words that would become legend. Mission still stands. The betrayal in orbit, the tunnels under the mountain stretched for miles, carved long ago by Altherian engineers who dreamed of peace. Princess Lyra moved through the darkness with trembling hands, clutching the data chip Elias had given her. Her body ached, her heart heavier than the stone around her. Every few minutes she glanced back, half expecting to see his silhouette appear behind her. But only silence followed. At last she reached the end of the tunnel where a small maintenance shaft led to the surface. There, hidden under debris, rested a half-buried shuttle, old but intact. Lyra climbed inside and tried to start it. The control panel flickered weakly. Her fingers shook as she pressed random keys, remembering the words Elias had told her about human machines. "Trust the systems, they'll listen if you talk to them," she whispered softly. "Please work, please." The engines coughed, sputtered, then came alive with a low hum. Tears filled her eyes. He did it. He kept me alive. With shaking hands, she lifted the shuttle into the dark sky, leaving behind the mountains and the grave of a human who had given everything. The planet's orbit was filled with debris, burned wrecks and drifting metal. Lyra flew carefully through the wreckage, hoping the Council's scanners wouldn't detect her. But luck was never kind in war. Within minutes, a sharp alarm echoed through the cockpit. Multiple ships approaching fast. She looked at the radar and froze. They weren't enemy ships, they were human. The symbol of Earth's fleet glowed bright on their hulls. For a brief moment, hope filled her chest. "They came for me," she whispered. A transmission crackled to life. "Unidentified vessel. This is Admiral Roth of the Human Expeditionary Command." "Prepare to be boarded," Lyra hesitated, confused. "He said humans were my friends," she murmured. The shuttle locked into the docking bay of a massive human carrier, and the metal doors closed around her like a cage. She stepped out cautiously, clutching her pendant. Dozens of armored soldiers stood before her, their weapons trained but not fired. Admiral Roth stepped forward, tall and cold, his voice sharp. "Princess Lyra of Altheria, on behalf of humanity, you are under protective custody." She blinked, the words felt wrong. "Protective?" she repeated softly. Roth nodded slowly. "You are a political asset. The Council wants you alive, and we will deliver you in exchange for peace." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Her voice broke. "You're going to give me to them?" Roth's eyes showed no regret, only duty. "Your war is not ours." Captain Ward acted without orders. He risked everything for nothing. Lyra's heart cracked like glass. "He died for honor," she whispered, "and you call it nothing." Roth turned away. "Prepare her for transport," he said to his men. The soldiers stepped forward, but Lyra held out the pendant in her hand. With trembling courage, she shouted, "Elias Ward gave his life to protect me. He believed in something better than this." Her words echoed in the docking bay, and for a moment even the soldiers hesitated. But Roth's cold voice cut through the silence. Captain Ward's idealism died with him. He turned toward the control room, unaware that deep within Lyra's pocket, the data chip began to flash. Elias's final message activated, projecting a small hologram of his face above her palm. His voice, calm and steady, filled the bay. "If you're seeing this, then the mission isn't over. To whoever finds this, the Council planned this war. They used both our people to cover their corruption. This chip holds proof." Gasps filled the air. The hologram showed encrypted files, images of secret treaties and council orders that condemned entire worlds. Lyra looked at the Admiral, her voice trembling but strong. "Now you know the truth." Roth's expression hardened. He barked an order. "Seize that data." Chaos erupted. Soldiers moved forward, but one young officer hesitated, his conscience fighting his orders. He whispered, "Sir, if this is true, we've betrayed humanity itself." Roth glared at him. "We serve command, not dreams." Before anyone could react, the hologram of Elias spoke one last line. "If you still have honor, stand with the truth." The young officer turned his weapon toward Roth. "Then I choose the truth." Blaster fire filled the room, alarms blaring as soldiers turned on each other. Lyra ducked behind a crate as explosions shook the deck. Smoke filled the bay, and in the confusion, she ran toward a smaller emergency fighter. Her heart pounded, her ears ringing from the battle behind her. As she climbed into the cockpit, the young officer appeared, blood on his arm. "Go, Princess, take the data and tell the galaxy what really happened." She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." He smiled weakly. "Tell them Elias Ward was right. She launched the fighter into space, engines roaring, the massive carrier fading behind her as human ships turned their guns on one another. From the distance, she saw the great vessel break apart, bright light scattering into the void like shattered stars. For the first time, she truly understood what Elias meant. That honor wasn't a flag or a command. It was a choice. The fighter's navigation system locked onto a safe route, pointing toward the outer sectors where the Altherian queen might still be alive. Lyra set the autopilot, clutching the pendant close to her chest. Her whisper was barely audible. He risked everything so I could live. Now I will finish what he started outside. The stars stretched endlessly, cold and beautiful, behind her. The war continued to burn, but somewhere in that darkness, a single spark of truth had been lit, and in every corner of the galaxy, whispers began to spread. Of a human soldier who defied the council, of a princess who carried his message, of hope reborn in the ashes of betrayal. The story was not over, it was only beginning. The final flight stars shimmered across the dark horizon like silent witnesses to war. Princess Lyra's small fighter ship moved through the emptiness, a fragile spark in the vast sea of black. Her hands trembled on the controls, her body still shaking from the chaos she had escaped. The human fleet that had betrayed her was now gone, torn apart by their own guns. But she carried something far more powerful than weapons: the truth. In her pocket, the data chip pulsed with a soft blue glow, containing Elias Ward's final proof. It was the heart of his mission, the legacy of his courage, she whispered to herself. You said the mission still stands, Elias, so I'll finish it. The navigation system beeped, guiding her toward the coordinates of the Queen's hidden refuge world. It was deep within the Nibarian Nebula, a place surrounded by ion storms and ancient defenses. Even the Council's fleets avoided it, fearing its unstable energy fields. The journey would take hours, maybe days, and her fighter's fuel was nearly gone. Still, she refused to stop, because stopping meant his sacrifice would mean nothing. As the fighter glided between drifting asteroids, her eyes caught the faint reflection of his face in the cockpit glass. For a moment, she imagined him sitting beside her, calm and steady. You're not alone, Princess, she whispered softly, tears rolling down her cheeks. Her voice was barely a whisper, carried away by the hum of the engines. She closed her eyes for a brief second, remembering his words, his promise, his smile through the cracked visor. A human who had come from a world she once feared, who showed her what honor truly was. The silence broke suddenly, alarms flashing bright red across the controls. Warning! Hostile ships detected, the system's voice announced. Lyra's heart dropped. She looked at the radar. Multiple enemy blips approaching fast. They were Council interceptors, sleek and deadly, closing in from behind. She gritted her teeth, pushing the throttle forward. But her small ship was slower, weaker. Laser fire streaked past her, shaking the hull, sparks flying from the console. The nebula was still far ahead, but she had no choice. She aimed for it anyway. She dodged between asteroids, the enemy fire following her like a storm of light. One shot grazed the wing. The ship spun, alarm screaming. She fought for control, her hands burning from the heat of the controls. Come on, she cried. Don't give up on me now. The ship steadied just enough for her to fire back. A single missile streaked behind her, hitting one interceptor and tearing it apart. But more followed, a swarm of them. Cold and merciless, the lead ship opened a channel, a cold mechanical voice echoing through the cockpit. Surrender, Princess Lyra. The Council demands your return. Her voice shook but did not break. You'll have to kill me first. She cut the comms and dived straight into the edge of the Nibarian Nebula. Electric storms erupted around her, flashes of blue and purple lightning tearing through the black. Her ship's shields flared as energy waves crashed against them. The Council pilots hesitated for a moment. The nebula was too dangerous, but they still followed. Lyra's vision blurred, her breath quick, but her heart was steady. She remembered Elias's words. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing it anyway. Inside the nebula, the storms howled, ripping through the void like angry spirits. The sensors failed, communication dropped. Everything became chaos and light. Lyra's hands moved on instinct, flying through narrow gaps, dodging lightning bolts that could split moons. Her ship shook violently, but she refused to slow down. Behind her, the interceptors were breaking apart one by one, struck by the storms they had dared to follow through. Still, two remained, persistent as shadows. Lyra's system screamed, hull integrity at 20%, power failing, but ahead, through the electric mist, she saw it, a faint green glow, the beacon of her mother's hidden world. The sight gave her strength. She pushed the engines to their limit, the roar filling the cockpit. Almost there, she whispered. Almost. A final blast hit the rear of her ship. Panels burst open, fire spreading through the controls. She screamed as the ship spun out of control, alarms blaring, glass cracking around her. Elias, she whispered, clutching the pendant at her neck. Please, help me. The last thing she saw before blacking out was the planet's surface rushing toward her. A blur of light and shadow. When she awoke, everything was quiet. The crash site lay in a lush valley surrounded by silver trees, their leaves glowing softly under a green sky. Her ship was destroyed, smoke curling from the wreckage, but she was alive. Her pendant was still around her neck, the data chip still glowing faintly in her palm. She struggled to her feet, pain shooting through her body, and looked toward the distant horizon. There, towers of crystal rose into the sky, shimmering like hope itself. It was the royal citadel. Her mother's lost refuge. She began to walk, every step heavy, every breath a battle. Behind her, the wreckage of her ship burned like a beacon, sending smoke into the heavens from orbit. A massive shadow moved, a council dreadnought tracking the energy flare from her crash. Its commander spoke coldly, target acquired. Prepare for orbital strike. But even in their distant arrogance, they didn't notice something else. A signal pulsed through the void, carried by the same code that once belonged to Captain Elias Ward's armor. It was a ghost transmission, buried deep in human satellites, and it said only this: protect the princess. As the dreadnought locked its cannons on the planet, a series of explosions erupted from its own hull. Hidden war drones, remnants of human fleets long lost, had been waiting silently in orbit. They activated on the signal, charging straight into the enemy ship. The stars lit up with fire as humanity's forgotten machines fulfilled one last order. Lyra fell to her knees, watching the sky burn with streaks of red and gold. She knew what it meant. Elias's plan had gone beyond even death. He had prepared for this moment, for her final flight. The heavens roared as the dreadnought broke apart, and silence followed. Lyra wiped her tears, whispering, "You really never left me." Then she turned toward the citadel, limping but unbroken. The wind carried her voice across the valley. "I'll finish your mission, Elias. I'll tell them who you were." And in that moment, as the last fires of the sky dimmed, the universe itself seemed to bow to the courage of one human who refused to be forgotten. The reunion and the legend. The wind carried the scent of rain across the green valley. Princess Lyra limped through the tall grass, her torn dress fluttering like a banner of survival. Each step hurt, yet she never stopped. Guided by the crystal towers glimmering on the horizon, the closer she came, the more the air shimmered with energy, soft lights dancing through the mist like living stars. Somewhere ahead, her mother waited. Though the queen believed her daughter lost forever, two royal guards spotted her first, their silver armor gleaming in the twilight. They raised their weapons, cautious, until they saw the pendant on her neck, the royal seal that only the true heir could wear. One of them dropped to his knees, whispering in disbelief, "By the moons, it's her." They rushed forward to support her, but Lyra shook her head gently. "I can walk." Her eyes were fixed on the tallest tower, where a bright light pulsed like a heartbeat. Word spread through the citadel faster than the wind. "The princess has returned." Inside the grand hall, Queen Serenia stood frozen as the heavy doors opened. For a moment she thought it was another dream born of grief. Then she saw the familiar silver eyes and heard a trembling voice say, "Mother?" The queen ran forward, all composure forgotten, her crown falling to the floor as she wrapped her daughter in her arms. Tears streamed down both their faces. Mixing with dust and ash, Lyra's voice broke. "Yes, Mom, I'm safe, thanks to him." The hall fell silent. The words carried through every corner like a prayer. Queen Serenia pulled back slightly, confusion filling her gaze. "Him?" Lyra opened her hand, revealing the small data chip glowing faintly. "A human soldier named Elias Ward. He saved me. He saved everything." Servants and generals gathered around as she placed the chip into a projection core. A hologram flickered to life. Elias's final message, his tired yet steady face appearing above the crystal floor. "Your Majesty," his voice began, calm as always. If this reaches you, then the princess lives. And my mission is complete. The queen covered her mouth as the recording continued. He spoke of the council's deceit, the manipulation that forced war between species that once stood as friends. He exposed every lie, every order signed in shadows, every innocent world destroyed for profit and control. When the message ended, silence filled the chamber. Then the queen stood tall, her tears replaced by fire. For generations they called humanity reckless. Yet one man showed more honor than the entire council combined. She turned to her generals. Send this message to every world that still has ears to hear. Let them know the truth. Lyra stepped closer. He died to protect hope, Mother. He said courage isn't about not being afraid. The queen smiled through her grief. Then we will be courageous in his name, within days. The truth spread like wildfire across the stars. Empires trembled, fleets refused their orders, and planets once ruled by fear raised human and Altherian flags together. A rebellion unlike any before began, not for conquest but for justice. And at the heart of it all stood a story whispered in every language, the human who saved the princess. Months passed, the war finally ended, and a new alliance was born. At the dedication of the Peace Monument, Queen Serenia stood before a crowd that filled an entire valley. Beside her was a tall stone statue, a human soldier in battered armor, his visor cracked, his stance proud and unyielding. At his feet, the words were carved in both human and Altherian script. Elias Ward. He stood when all others fell. Lyra placed her hand on the statue's arm, whispering softly, "You kept your promise, Captain. I'm home." Above them, hundreds of ships hovered in formation, their lights forming the shape of wings across the sky. The queen spoke to the gathered worlds, her voice amplified by the great crystals. This alliance began with one man's courage, a human who saw an enemy child and chose compassion over orders. May we remember him not as a soldier, but as the bridge between our hearts. The crowd bowed their heads in silence, some in prayer, some in awe. Lyra felt a single drop of rain on her cheek, then another, the storm clouds breaking open as if the universe itself wept in gratitude. That night she stood alone on the balcony overlooking the valley. The stars reflected in her eyes. Endless and bright, she whispered into the wind. "I wish you could see this, Elias." A soft gust brushed her hair, carrying with it a faint echo, a voice she could almost hear. "I'm always here, Princess." She smiled through her tears, the pendant around her neck glowing faintly as if answering his call. Far beyond the Alliance worlds, deep in forgotten space, a small signal beacon blinked to life among the wreckage of an ancient battlefield. Its code was simple, a message that repeated endlessly through the void. Humanity still stands, mission complete. And so the legend of Captain Elias Ward spread through generations, told in songs, carved in monuments, whispered by children staring at the stars. They said he was more than human. He was the spirit of what humanity could be when guided by honor. The soldier who risked everything so a crying alien princess could finally say Mom again. In every story that followed, in every war that tried to rise again, his name returned like light cutting through darkness. Elias Ward, the human who taught the galaxy the meaning of honor.